Hey there, how's it going? In today's video, I'm going to talk about kayaks. I've decided I need to get a kayak for next season, and I've also decided it's going to be a pedal drive kayak. So, I want to talk about the pros and cons of pedal drive kayaks to begin with, and then I'll sort of talk about the models that I'm looking for the style of fishing that I do. So pedal drive kayaks are very popular for anglers, for fishermen, because they offer sort of a hands-free way to move your kayak around and even hold position in some ways. Like any kind of gear, they sort of have their pluses and minuses. One of the main advantages of pedal drive kayaks is their ease of use. You don't have to fight with the paddle and the rods and everything else. If the wind is trying to move you, you can position yourself sort of into the wind and just work the pedals a little bit to hold the position that you want to hold. They also have most of them have a fairly easy forward and reverse, and so you can go backwards if you're getting blown into something or you need to pull a fish out of cover, so you can still be fighting the fish, old school, you can still be fighting the fish and backing up at the same time because your feet are controlling that. They also tend to be a little bit more efficient than paddle-driven kayaks, so they don't give you quite as much of the workout when you're out on the water, which can be good or bad, right? To me, it's a pro because I want to focus my energy on catching the fish and not on wearing out my arms and shoulders with the paddle. When I went fishing with Ish in October, as we were coming off the water and we started talking a little bit, one of the first things he said is like, well, when you get a kayak, make sure you get a pedal drive. My experience in canoes over the years has convinced me that I'd like to have a pedal drive, but also that time in the kayak, I got blown into the weeds a couple times. I just about broke a rod one time because it takes a lot to manage, 2 rods or more, a net, the paddle, everything else. So in general, I agree with Ish. Like, I'm going to get a pedal drive kayak. Another benefit of pedal drive kayaks is versatility. Many of them have adjustable seats, they have adjustable pedals. A lot of them you can remove the pedals so that you can still use it like a traditional kayak if you're going to do in some really shallow waters. So there's they give you a lot of different options. They also tend to be extremely well set up for fishing. It's not that fishermen are the only ones that use pedal drive kayaks, but they seem to be very fishing focused for the most part. Now, some of the cons. One potential drawback is the extra maintenance. The great thing about modern kayaks, especially paddle ones, is they're really not much to go wrong with them unless you wear through the bottom. They're just just throw them in the water, you can leave them outside, whatever, they're going to be absolutely fine. Another one is the cost. In some cases it's at least 50% more. Sometimes it looks like it's double to buy a new pedal drive versus a new paddle driven kayak. They also seem to hold their value better on the used market. So pedal drive kayaks are typically, they're fetching a pretty solid premium and holding most of the value of what you could get them new for, at least in 80% of the offerings that I'm seeing. So there are a few exceptions, but when you find a really good deal on a pedal drive kayak used, you probably need to jump on it because it's not going to last that long. And then probably the last negative is they're a lot heavier as well. They sometimes 20, 30 pounds more. And fishing kayaks in general are not lightweight. A lot of them are in the 60, 70 pound range. When you get into pedal drives, you're starting to talk into the 80s and 100 pound range, and some of them a good bit higher than that. So pedal drive kayaks can create a lot of weight. They're not as easy to, in fact, a lot of them probably shouldn't be car topped. So they do create their own challenges as far as transportation as well. So those are the pros and cons of pedal drive kayaks. Ultimately, I think your choice is going to depend on your preferences, your needs, and maybe your budget as well. So with that, I want to talk about some of the different models that I've considered and what I've looked into and where I've ultimately landed and where I think I'm going to buy. Like, I have the model picked, I think I know what I want, but we'll just have to wait and see how it all plays out. I do want to find it at the price that I want to get it at. So let's get into this here. So the first one is the Old Town Sportsman PDL. This, at least for the fishing YouTubers that I watch, this is one of the ones that I see most often. Guys like John over at Creek Fishing Adventures, Nick from 618 Fishing, even the Creek Crawler over in Ohio. Those are all people that use this Old Town PDL. It's a nice kayak. It really is. I don't have any huge real significant negatives over it, it would be one that I would definitely consider. Probably the negative of a lot of the kayaks, and this is something that I'm trying to navigate through, is the ones that have the propeller, and most of them move through with a sort of like a bicycle pedal motion. They seem to sometimes clog up with weeds. I don't know how big of a problem that'll be, but I know some of the waters that I plan to fish, they have a good bit of weeds, especially around the edges in the summer and fall. You know, is that a deal breaker? I don't know for sure, but that is probably the one negative. The Old Town seems to be very durable. I have seen some wear and tear on the rudder control handle, so it's probably a decent upgrade that you want to make if you go with that one. The other thing is just the way the drive mechanism works. I don't want to say it's not forgiving, but it's fixed in place. And so if you hit something submerged, like a log or a rock, it could do a little bit more damage than some of the other options. And so that's one of the things that holds me back. The other thing is the Old Town is I wouldn't call it a premium option, but it's not cheap. You know, it's definitely not the lowest price option out there. I think it's a really good kayak, and I think it's one that probably suits a lot of people. I just don't think it's going to be the optimal one for me. I've never done much fishing out of kayaks. I've never owned a fishing kayak. So I may go through all this and a year later say, oh no, I need this instead. And that's fine, but this is my initial analysis. The next one is the Jackson Coosa FD. The Coosa has been around quite a while. It's probably one of the more stable kayaks for like river fishing. And I mean, it can handle basic whitewater as well. Several years ago when I looked at getting a fishing kayak the first time around, and I didn't do it, I bought a canoe instead, and that really didn't suit me the way I wanted. We still have one canoe, but I bought a Kevlar canoe a few years ago, and it had a lot of the same issues of a paddle-driven kayak, which is it was hard to hold in position, and quite frankly, the Kevlar was really noisy. And so what I did like about when I was out with Ish is the plastic really is not nearly as loud. It's not quite as good as wood. Our other canoe is a wooden canvas, so it's not quite as comfortable and quiet as that, but it's close. Where the Kevlar was just like banging around. So they're just, to me, they're not really great fishing machines just because of the amount of noise that they make. So this is the Jackson Coosa FD. The thing that I really like about the Jackson foot drive, as they call it, the FD, it's still bicycle pedal style. It's a little bit different. It looks a little bit more like something off of an exercise machine. But their drive, if you hit something, it'll actually sort of pop up in. So it's almost like spring-loaded. So it gives you a little bit more insurance. But that being said, it's still got most of the other, well, it's still got the other main issue of the prop-driven, you know, the propeller. And will that get tied up in weeds or stuff? It seems to be very easy to clear both the Old Town and the Jackson. You know, either one would be just fine. And the other thing is the Jackson is expensive. I hardly ever see any of their foot drive pedals for sale used. Now, that could mean that people really like it, and so that's why it's not available. You know, it's just I've decided that that's not going to be the one that I go. Now, the third kayak that I've spent a little bit of time looking at was the Native Slayer Propel 10. I just, there wasn't anything that really made me love the idea of the Slayer. I know some people really like it. It seems sort of interchangeable with some of the other kayaks. The Old Town, the Native Slayer, actually the Native foot drives, they all they seem very similar. And so there wasn't anything different that the Propel offers. And so, and it's, you know, it's moderately priced. I have seen a handful of those used. So going back to the Jackson, I don't know if that just means I have better dealers in the area, and so there's more of them available, or if people buy them and they don't like them quite as much. I don't know, either way. The next one, before I had my heart set on a pedal drive of some sort, this was the kayak that I wanted, and that was the Bonafide SS127. It seems to have a great blend of speed, stability. The knock is they're heavy, but they seem to be amazing fishing machines, and they seem to be very stable. And if you've ever seen any of my videos of me like stumbling through the stream and stuff like that, you know, I don't necessarily have the greatest balance at my age, and so I do like the idea of the Bonafide. But again, their pedal drive is very much the same as the Natives in the Old Town. You know, if you know about fishing kayaks, you probably know where I'm headed at this point. I got one more that I want to talk about real quick, and that's the Pescador Pilot. For some reason, I must be on an Australian site. I see these quite often at almost half the price of most of the other ones. The Pescador Pilot, as I understand it, is very similar to the old Wilderness Tarpon. May actually be built on the old molds, and of course the mold's been updated to allow the pedal drive. But the reason I bring that up is, if you've ever watched Indy Yak Angler, he's on a Tarpon. That kayak is amazing in moving water. And so this would be one of the reasons that I would maybe consider it, is that combined that type of hull design with the pedal drive, it should be a very high performing machine. On the other side of it is, it's not as feature packed as some of the other ones. It's a little bit more stripped down. You know, I don't know. I still can't say that 100% I won't end up with a Pescador Pilot if I get the right deal. It has essentially the same pedal drive as all the other ones that I've talked about, other than the Jackson. The Jackson has a little bit different design. But if you can get it for less than half the price, you know, sometimes it's sort of like, well, is it worth it? And especially as a new pedal drive kayak owner, it could make a lot of sense for me to buy a little bit less expensive one and really then say, okay, well, here's what I love about it, here's what I don't love, and so then therefore I can make a more informed decision before spending more. I do think that the Pescador Pilot might be one of the best values out there, whether you're buying new or whether you're buying used. But for whatever reason, used, they don't seem to hold their value, and so I don't know 100% if that means that they get sort of janky, they really don't work the way that they should, they break down early, or if it's just because it's already at a lower price point, there's not a huge demand for them, and so that makes the price a little bit lower. I've routinely seen these for sale for $1,000 or less. So at that price, it's sort of, you know, I haven't pulled the trigger yet, and there's two of them around me right now that are in that ballpark, and then negotiate a little bit, you might get it for even less. There's a chance you may see me with one of those at some point, but it's not the target. And so what is the kayak that I'm planning on getting? Well, after looking at everything that's out there, I really think that the Hobie Mirage Outback, the 2020 and newer models, they just seem to be really well suited to the way that I want to fish and the places that I want to fish. The number one thing being is the pedal drive itself. So they don't use a bicycle pedal system. Theirs is a little bit more of a just a back and forth. It is much more efficient. It seems to work much better. It doesn't put as much strain on you, and it doesn't require as much effort. More importantly, because of the way that the fins are, they don't use a prop. They have these two little fins that stick down. So it's basically this fin drive system. Here, this shows a little bit better. So they have these two little fins that drive. The way you push back and forth, it basically causes the fins to go like this. But what happens is if you get to the extremes and you just go like this, they sort of flutter, but they still move you forward. So this can function in very shallow water and still be able to move you forward. So the 2020 and newer models, 2019 they made a lot of cosmetic changes, but in 2020 they changed the drive itself. So now it has what's called kick-up fins. And so with the kick-up fins, basically if you hit a rock or you hit a stump, or even if you just catch the bottom, essentially, the fins will kick back instead of breaking, instead of getting, you know, like the props, some of the drive units, when you hit something, I mean, it's solid. It just stops you, and you could break a prop, you could do some damage there. The kick-up fins seem to have a lot more flexibility. You know, if you're not paying as much attention, especially if you start fishing rivers and you know there's some shallower water coming and you think you have enough depth, or you're focused on fishing and you don't notice that log coming up, that, you know, because you're fishing this way and there's something right here or a stone. The kick-up fins can quite possibly save you. Those are two of the biggest reasons. It really comes down to the drive system itself. But then when you get into the actual design of the kayak, I think they have the best designed kayak for fishing as well, at least in my opinion. A couple of the key things here on the screen is this little well design here. This well design, it has two rails of track to be able to mount to. It's got these little slots where you can put your tools in, but it's also got integrated leashes built in. So you can actually put the leash with a retractable bungee on it, and if something happens, you knock your pliers or your scissors over, even your measuring board, it can be leashed to an integrated leash that's already in. And so the management of that, I remember when I had my canoe, I had rod leashes for all my stuff and a few other things, and you always had those things laying all over the place. This seems to be a much cleaner interface to be able to keep things secure. The other really major thing and they have a similar thing in the back, the seat's also great. Another thing about the Hobie is there's rudder controls on both sides. A lot of them just have them on the left. So with this being on both sides, it gives you a lot more flexibility. I think that's a pretty nice thing as well. The rudder is also a kick-up rudder. I think a lot of them have something like that though. The other one is this Hobie Guardian transducer shield. So I do plan on putting a fish finder on this. I suck at fishing lakes, so if I'm going to put a kayak out on a lake, eventually I want to be able to figure out how to understand how to catch fish on a lake. This retractable transducer shield, basically it acts very similar to the fins or to the Jackson foot drive. If you hit something, it actually pops back up in to protect your transducer. And it also has a cord where you can pull the cord and pull it all the way up in. And so that way, as you're launching and stuff like that, you don't have to worry about your transducer. And it just makes it a lot cleaner install. Downside of the Hobie is probably the price. I've been struggling to find them used for under $3,000. I did see one and it was a 2020. It looked like it was in immaculate shape. Price dropped from like $2,800 to $2,050. I wasn't ready to buy yet. It was before Christmas, and I was still thinking through. That's sort of like my target. I want to try to get one of these for like $2,400 or less, and I want it to be a 2020 or newer model, just so that it has all of the new stuff in there. So that's where I'm at right now. There is one other model that I see some older versions of it for sale. It's arguably probably like the best fishing platform, but it's almost like a small boat compared to a true kayak, and that's the Hobie Pro Angler. This is the 14. There's also a 12. The 14 seems to be the preferred, but you know, is 14 feet too big for some of the places? And is this kayak itself too big for a lot of the places I want to go? I think the answer is probably yes. You know, if I got an amazing deal on it, I might pull the trigger on one. The problem is the older ones, they didn't have reverse, and they definitely don't have the kick-up fins. So you have these you know, the two issues of you almost have to pull the entire drive out, swing it around to be able to go in reverse, and that's not practical, especially when you're fighting a fish, or you know, if you want to make a decision fairly quickly. The negative of the Mirage Outback is to go into reverse, you have to basically pull a little cord, and so it does take a split second longer than say all of the pedal drives, you know, the bicycle pedal styles that have pretty much instantaneous reverse. Everything's a trade-off, right? I don't think there's a perfect kayak. For me, I think the Mirage Outback is probably the perfect one. The Pro Angler is much more stable. It weighs like 30 pounds more. I mean, it's a heavy kayak. It's probably pushing 140, 150 pounds. It's really not that portable, at least in my opinion. So it's a great kayak. And if you want a kayak that goes on a trailer, sort of rides like a boat, Pro Angler would be the right thing. I just don't think it's right for me with the amount of streams and rivers that I want to fish and the way I want to transport it. So, I mean, you look at the size of this thing. I mean, that's a big kayak. I mean, the thing is freaking huge. And that gives you an idea of the foot motion of the Mirage drive. I'll let you know when I get one. Hey, if anybody's out there and wants to hook me up, let me know. Again, I'm trying to get in that $2,400 price range or less. I mean, less would be great. I do expect to do a lot of fishing out of a kayak next year. Still going to do a ton of my stream wading, but during the summer when I don't fish quite as much, just because the streams and the creeks that I like to fish seem to get too warm, and the fish either, I don't know if they leave or if they just shut down. I often don't fish a ton in the summer. I would spend more times on lakes and rivers in the kayak through the summer, and that's probably a big part of what I'm going to do. Again, there are stretches of the other water that I want to fish, and I have some ideas of being able to fish maybe long stretches and try to put together sort of a little mini series of a body of water. But yeah, that's it. That's where I'm at on the kayak. Let me know what your favorite models are. Is there something I missed? Is there one that I should really be looking at? You know, did I miss something about the Hobie Outback that you're probably like, hey, don't get it because of this? That's going to be a fun experience. Fun part of 2023 is not only getting a kayak, but getting it outfitted. And so there'll probably be some videos around that too. Appreciate you watching. Look forward to seeing your comments on this below. With that, I'll see you next time.